Jungkook finally reveals the crushing pressure of carrying BTS's name, forcing the members to confront a truth they feared. "Stop the cameras." Jungkook's voice cut through the studio before the music could finish. The final note of the rehearsal track dissolved into the enormous room, leaving only the faint electrical hum of the ceiling lights and the uneven sound of 7 people breathing. Nobody moved. Jungkook stood beneath the harsh white spotlight, one hand still gripping the microphone, his chest rising and falling faster than it should have. Sweat had darkened the collar of his black shirt. A strand of damp hair clung to his forehead, and his eyes remained fixed on the enormous camera directly in front of him. Behind the camera, a staff member slowly lowered his headset. "Jungkook?" "I said stop." The word came quieter this time, but somehow it sounded more serious. RM looked up from the monitor. Jin's smile disappeared. J-Hope stopped adjusting the sleeve of his jacket. Jimin's hand froze halfway toward the water bottle beside him. Taeyoung stared at Jungkook as though he had suddenly become a stranger. Suga, sitting in the darkest corner of the rehearsal room, narrowed his eyes. The music system clicked into silence. For several seconds, the only sound was the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Then the director asked carefully, "Are you feeling sick?" Jungkook shook his head. "No." "Did you hurt yourself?" "No." "Then what happened?" Jungkook looked at the camera again. His fingers tightened around the microphone. "I don't want to do another take." The director glanced toward the production team. "We're almost done." "I know." "It's only one more performance." "I know." "Then I said I don't want to." The silence became heavier. RM slowly stepped forward. "Jungkook." Jungkook finally looked at him. There was something in his expression that made RM stop. It wasn't anger, it wasn't exhaustion. It was fear, a deep, almost invisible fear that Jungkook had become extraordinarily skilled at hiding. RM had seen him tired before. He had seen him frustrated, embarrassed, injured, nervous, even furious. He had never seen this. "Turn the cameras off," RM said. The director hesitated. "Namjoon, please." The director looked around the room. One by one, the cameras powered down. Small red lights disappeared. The giant screens went black. The room suddenly felt smaller. Jungkook lowered the microphone. He stared at the floor. "I can't breathe when that light is on." Nobody spoke. Jimin slowly put his water bottle down. Taeyoung took one step toward Jungkook. "Hyung." Jungkook laughed. It was a strange laugh, short, dry, almost embarrassed. "Don't." Taeyoung stopped. Jungkook rubbed both hands over his face. "I know how this sounds." "It doesn't sound like anything," Jimin said softly. "It does." "No. It sounds weak." Jimin's eyes hardened. "Don't call yourself weak." Jungkook looked at him. For a moment, something passed between them. Then Jungkook looked away. "I've spent years trying to not be the weak one." Suga finally stood. His chair scraped against the floor. Everyone turned. Suga walked toward Jungkook without saying anything. He stopped several feet away. "Who told you that you had to be the strong one?" Jungkook's lips parted. No answer came. Suga waited. "Who?" Jungkook looked down. "Nobody." "That's not an answer." "I don't know." "You do." Jungkook swallowed. His eyes began to shine. "I think." He stopped. His jaw tightened. "I think the world did." Nobody moved. Jungkook looked around the room. 7 chairs, 7 water bottles, 7 microphones, 7 people who had spent years standing beside him while millions of eyes watched them. "I think the world decided what BTS was supposed to be," he said quietly. "And then we became afraid of disappointing it." RM lowered his gaze. Jungkook continued. "Every time we walk onto a stage, Everyone expects something. They expect the vocals to be perfect, the choreography has to be perfect, the interviews have to be perfect, the jokes have to be perfect, the expressions have to be perfect. He gave another small laugh. Even when we're exhausted, we're supposed to look grateful. Jimin's eyes lowered. J-Hope whispered, "Jungkook." "And I understand why." Jungkook's voice cracked. "I really do." He looked toward the empty camera. "I know what BTS means to people." His breathing became uneven. "I know there are people who say they survived because of our music, people who say they gave us courage, people who say they made them feel less alone." He pressed the microphone against his chest. "And that's beautiful." His eyes filled with tears. "But sometimes," he closed his eyes, "sometimes it feels terrifying." Nobody interrupted. "Because what happens if I fail?" His voice became almost inaudible. "What happens if I can't dance?" Jimin's shoulders trembled. "What happens if I say the wrong thing?" RM's face tightened. "What happens if I disappoint them?" Jungkook finally looked at his members. "And what happens if one day I wake up and I don't know how to be Jungkook anymore because I've spent too many years trying to be BTS?" The room went completely still. Jin slowly sat down. Taeyoung covered his mouth. J-Hope looked at the floor. Suga's expression didn't change, but his eyes did. RM stared at Jungkook for several seconds. Then he walked toward him. "Come here." Jungkook shook his head. "Young, come here. I don't want everyone looking at me." "We're not everyone." Jungkook's face crumbled. He lowered the microphone. Then he walked forward. RM wrapped both arms around him. Jungkook stood rigid for 2 seconds. Then his body collapsed against RM's shoulder. The first sob came quietly, almost silently. Then another. Jungkook gripped the back of RM's shirt. "I don't know how to stop." RM closed his eyes. "You don't have to stop everything tonight." "I don't know how to rest." "Then we'll teach you." "I don't know how to disappoint people." RM tightened his arms. "Then let us disappoint them with you." Jungkook cried harder. Jimin stood up, then Jin, then J-Hope. Taeyoung wiped his face and approached. Suga remained still for a moment before finally walking over. The 7 members gathered together without saying anything. There was no camera, no audience, no stage, no choreography, no expectation. Just 7 people standing in a rehearsal room after midnight, holding on to one another, while the outside world continued moving without knowing what had happened. Eventually, Jungkook pulled away. He wiped his face quickly. "Sorry." Jin immediately frowned. "There it is again." Jungkook blinked. "What?" "Sorry." Jin pointed at him. "You apologize every time you feel something." Jungkook looked embarrassed. "I didn't mean to." "I know." Jin sighed. "You don't need to apologize for being human." Jungkook looked down. Suga leaned against the table. "That's the problem." Jungkook glanced toward him. "What is?" "You think being human is the mistake." The words landed harder than anyone expected. Jungkook didn't respond. Suga looked at him. "That's why you're exhausted." The room became quiet again. Jungkook walked toward the sofa and sat down. He bent forward, elbows on his knees. "I used to think pressure was something you could get used to." He stared at his hands. "When we were trainees, I thought debuting would make everything easier." Jin smiled faintly. "It didn't." "No." Jungkook smiled despite himself. "No, it definitely didn't." A quiet laugh moved through the room. For a moment, the tension loosened. Then Jungkook's expression changed again. "I thought if I worked hard enough, I wouldn't be afraid anymore." J-Hope sat beside him. "But you were. Every day." J-Hope looked at him. "Even now?" Jungkook nodded. "Especially now." Taeyoung sat on the floor in front of him. "Why especially now?" Jungkook hesitated. "Because BTS isn't small anymore." Nobody laughed. They all knew. They had watched the world grow around them. The stages had become bigger. The airports had become louder. The interviews had become more carefully prepared. The expectations had become impossible to measure. When we were younger, Jungkook said, if I made a mistake, maybe a few thousand people noticed. He looked at RM. Now, millions notice. RM nodded slowly, and sometimes it feels like they're waiting. For what? For me to fail. Jimin shook his head. Not everyone. I know. Then don't give the worst people the loudest voice. Jungkook smiled weakly. I wish it were that easy. It isn't. Jimin leaned forward. But maybe it can become easier. Jungkook looked at him. How? By remembering that the people who love you don't need you to be perfect. Jungkook's eyes became wet again. Jimin continued. They just need you to be you. Jungkook looked away. That's what scares me. What? What if who I am isn't enough? The sentence stayed in the air. Jimin's face softened. Jin looked toward the ceiling. J-Hope took a slow breath. RM seemed to search for the right words. Suga answered first. Then we have a problem. Jungkook looked up. Suga's voice remained calm. Because we've spent years being enough for each other. Jungkook stared at him. Suga shrugged. That's all that matters. A tear rolled down Jungkook's cheek. He wiped it away. Hyung. What? Do you ever feel that? Suga didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the dark windows. Every day. Jungkook's expression changed. Suga continued. You think you're the only one carrying something because you don't see ours. Jungkook looked at all of them. RM nodded. I've felt it. Jin smiled sadly. So have I. J-Hope lowered his head. Me too. Jimin's eyes glistened. Of course, Taeyoung whispered. Always. Jungkook looked stunned. But you all look so... He struggled to finish. Strong? Jin laughed. That's because we're professionals. Everyone laughed softly. Then Jin's smile faded. Or we're very good actors. Jungkook looked at him. Jin shrugged. Sometimes I don't know. Which? The laughter disappeared. RM sat on the floor. I think that's something we need to talk about. Everyone looked at him. Not tonight for the cameras, not for management, not for an interview. He looked at each member. For us. Jungkook nodded. RM continued. We've spent years talking about what BTS means to the world. His voice softened. But maybe we've forgotten to ask what BTS means to us. Nobody answered. The question was too large. Outside, rain began tapping against the windows. A few drops at first, then hundreds. The city lights blurred behind the glass. Jungkook watched the rain. For me, he hesitated. For me, BTS used to mean the place where I wanted to become someone. He rubbed his thumb against his palm. Now, sometimes it feels like the place where I'm not allowed to become anyone else. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Jungkook continued. I love this group. His voice shook. I love you guys more than I know how to explain. He looked at them. But sometimes I miss the person I was before everyone knew my name. Taeyoung swallowed. What do you miss? Jungkook smiled. Being able to make a bad song and never let anyone hear it. Jin laughed. That's strangely specific. I miss eating without wondering if I'll be too tired tomorrow. J-Hope smiled sadly. I miss walking into a store without thinking about whether someone will recognize me. Jungkook's smile faded. I miss making mistakes that disappear. The room became quiet. That might be the hardest part, he whispered. Nothing disappears anymore. RM lowered his eyes. Jungkook looked at the floor. Every mistake becomes a headline. He looked at his phone lying on the table. Every expression becomes a theory. He swallowed. Every silence becomes a rumor. He stared at the dark screen. And sometimes I don't even know which version of me people are talking about. No one had an immediate answer, because they knew. They had all lived inside that machine. The difference was that Jungkook had finally said it aloud. After several minutes, J-Hope stood. Let's go home. Jungkook looked surprised. What? Practice is over. But we still have... No. J-Hope smiled. We're done. Jungkook looked toward the director's equipment. What about tomorrow? Tomorrow will still exist tomorrow. Jin stood. And if the world ends because we skipped one rehearsal? Suga picked up his jacket. Then at least we'll be rested when it happens. Jungkook laughed. A real laugh this time. Small, tired, but real. They began gathering their things. Jungkook remained seated for a moment. Then he noticed something on the floor. A small piece of white tape marking his position. He stared at it. That tiny square had been there for hours. Step here, turn here, move there, smile here, look left, look right, repeat. He peeled it off the floor. Jimin noticed. What are you doing? Jungkook held the tape between his fingers. Removing my spot? Jimin smiled. Good. Jungkook placed the tape in the trash. Then he stood. They walked out together. The hallway was almost empty. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Jungkook walked in the middle of the group, surrounded by the people who had known him before the world had decided who he was supposed to become. For once, nobody asked him to perform. Nobody asked him to smile. Nobody asked him to explain. Nobody asked him to be Jungkook from BTS. He was simply Jungkook. And somehow, after years of trying to carry the entire name on his shoulders, that felt heavier and lighter at the same time. At the elevator, the doors opened. They stepped inside. Jungkook leaned against the wall. Taehyung stood beside him. You okay? Jungkook thought about it. I don't know. Taehyung nodded. That's okay. Jungkook looked at him. Is it? Yeah. Taehyung smiled. You don't have to know everything tonight. The elevator descended, floor by floor. The numbers changed. The rain continued outside. Jungkook looked at the reflection in the mirrored wall. For the first time that night, he didn't see the performer. He saw a tired young man with red eyes, damp hair, and a face that didn't need to hide anything. He smiled faintly at his own reflection. Then the elevator doors opened. They walked into the quiet lobby together. Outside, cameras were waiting somewhere beyond the rain. Cars were waiting. Schedules were waiting. The world was waiting. But for night, the 7 members moved slowly through the darkness, shoulder to shoulder. And finally, Jungkook allowed himself to walk without trying to be ahead of everyone. He walked with them, not for the world, not for the cameras, not for the name, just because they were his people. And as the rain softened against the glass doors, Jungkook realized something he had forgotten for years. He did not have to carry BTS alone. He never had.
Tell me the truth, Jungkook. Are you thinking about leaving BTS? The question hit the room like a glass thrown against concrete. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Jungkook sat at the far end of the conference table with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of water that had gone untouched for nearly 20 minutes, his thumbs slowly tracing the damp ring beneath it. Across from him, the executive who had asked the question remained perfectly still, his expression carefully neutral, as if he had not just dropped a match into a room full of gasoline. RM's head snapped toward him. What did you just ask? The executive repeated himself. I'm asking whether Jungkook has considered stepping away from group activities. No, RM said immediately. That's not what he said last night. I wasn't asking you. Then ask him something worth answering. The temperature in the room seemed to fall. Jimin looked at Jungkook. Taehyung's jaw tightened. J-Hope leaned forward, hands clasped together so tightly that his knuckles had gone pale. Jin stared at the executive with an expression that had none of his usual humor. Suga sat motionless, but his eyes were sharp enough to cut through the polished table between them. Jungkook finally raised his head. I didn't say I wanted to leave. His voice was quiet. But you said you don't know how to be Jungkook anymore, the executive replied. Those words are circulating internally. Jungkook's fingers stopped moving. Circulating. Someone recorded part of the conversation after rehearsal. Jimin stood so quickly that his chair slammed backward. What? The executive didn't blink. The audio was not supposed to leave the building. Then how did it leave? J-Hope demanded. We're investigating. Suga laughed once without humor. That's convenient. Yoongi, no, don't. Suga's voice was low. You don't get to bring us into a room, tell us something private was recorded, and then say you're investigating as if that makes it disappear. RM leaned forward. Who recorded it? We don't know. Then find out. We are trying. Try harder. RM's voice had changed. It was no longer the calm leader's voice used in interviews. It was the voice of someone who had spent years swallowing anger because he knew exactly how dangerous anger could become when millions of people were watching. Jungkook stared at the table. His stomach had been twisting since dawn. The previous night had been the first time in months that he had spoken honestly without calculating every sentence. Now someone had taken those words and turned them into a weapon. His phone vibrated on the table. Then again. Then again. He didn't touch it. Jimin's phone vibrated too. Taehyung's followed. Then Jin's. Soon all 7 phones were lighting up like warning signals. Don't look, Jimin whispered. Jungkook looked anyway. The headline was already everywhere. Jungkook considers Leaving BTS after private breakdown. Beneath it was a distorted audio clip. His own voice. Sometimes I miss the person I was before everyone knew my name. The clip ended there. Thousands of comments were appearing beneath it every second. Some begged him to stay. Some accused him of betrayal. Some claimed he had become arrogant. Others insisted the group was collapsing. A few accounts were already spreading a completely fabricated story claiming Jungkook had secretly demanded a solo contract and threatened to walk away if management refused. Jungkook's face went pale. This is insane. Put the phone down, RM said. They're saying I want to leave. Put it down. But I never said that. I know. Everyone else doesn't. I know. Jungkook looked at him. Then what am I supposed to do? RM didn't answer immediately, because for once he didn't have one. The door opened. Another executive entered with 2 staff members behind him. We need to discuss crisis response. Suga's head lifted. No, the executive frowned. Excuse me, we're not doing a crisis response before we understand who leaked it. The public is already reacting. Let them react. That isn't realistic. Neither is pretending this is a marketing problem. The executive placed a tablet on the table. There are millions of views already. And, Suga asked, and if we don't control the narrative, someone else will. Jungkook stared at the tablet. Control the narrative. He repeated the phrase softly. That's what you call it, nobody answered. He looked up. You mean control me? That's not what I said. It's what you mean. RM stood. We're not releasing a statement that says Jungkook is fine. The executive frowned. Why not? Because he's not fine. The room fell silent. Jungkook looked at RM in surprise. RM continued. And I'm not going to let you turn his breakdown into another polished sentence about gratitude and commitment. The executive's expression hardened. Namjoon, think carefully. This is bigger than one person. Exactly. RM pointed toward Jungkook. That's why this matters. The group has obligations. So does the company. We have investors. Suga leaned back. There it is. The executive glanced at him. What? The truth. Suga's smile was cold. You don't care whether Jungkook is okay, you care whether the stock price is. That's an unfair characterization. Then prove me wrong. Silence. Jimin looked at Jungkook. He could see the guilt forming behind his eyes again, the same guilt from last night, only now it had grown teeth. Maybe I should apologize, Jungkook whispered. Every head turned. For what? Jimin asked. For causing this. You didn't leak the recording. But I said it. In private. I still said it, because you were hurting. Jungkook looked at him. Does that matter anymore? Jimin stood and walked around the table. It matters to me. He crouched beside Jungkook. Look at me. Jungkook hesitated, then he did. You don't owe the internet your pain. Jimin's voice shook. You don't owe strangers an explanation for having a bad night. You don't owe anyone perfection. But I'm BTS. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. So am I, he touched Jungkook's shoulder. And so are they. He looked toward the others. If you're falling, we're not going to stand there and tell you to fall more gracefully. Jin's eyes became wet. Exactly. The executive sighed. We need a statement. Jin turned toward him. You keep saying that, because it's necessary. No, Jin's voice was suddenly hard. What's necessary is finding out who betrayed us. That word changed the room. Betrayed. Nobody wanted to say it, but everyone had been thinking it. The recording had come from inside. Someone had been close enough to hear them after the cameras were shut down. Someone had stayed when everyone else believed they were alone. Someone had carried the audio out. RM looked around the room. Who knew the cameras were off? A staff member shifted uncomfortably. The executive noticed. Several people. Names. Namjoon. Names. The executive exhaled. Production staff, management, security, a few assistants. How many? I don't have the exact number. Suga stood. Then we're wasting our time. He walked toward the door. Where are you going? To find someone who does. The executive stepped in front of him. Nobody leaves until we agree on a response. Suga stopped. Move, Yoongi. Move. The two men stared at each other. Then RM stepped between them. We're leaving. The executive shook his head. This isn't finished. RM looked at him. It never is. The 7 members left the room together. The hallway felt strangely bright. Staff members looked away as they passed. Some whispered, some pretended not to notice. Jungkook heard his name once, then again. He kept walking. In the elevator, nobody spoke. The doors closed. Jungkook stared at the numbers descending. What if it was one of them? Taehyung asked quietly. Jin looked at him. One of who? Someone we trust. Suga folded his arms. Then we'll find out. J-Hope looked at Jungkook. And when we do, we decide what happens next. Jungkook swallowed. What if it's someone we can't punish? RM's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? What if it's someone important? Nobody answered. The elevator opened. Their security team was waiting. Outside the building, cameras flashed through the glass doors. The sound was muffled, but the flashes looked violent. Jungkook instinctively stepped backward. Jimin grabbed his wrist. Stay with me. I'm okay. I know. I can walk. I know. Then why are you holding me? Jimin smiled faintly. Because I want to. They walked outside. Questions exploded around them. Jungkook, are you leaving BTS? Jungkook, did you demand a solo contract? Is BTS breaking up? Did you fight with the other members? Was the recording real? Jungkook flinched at the last question. RM immediately moved in front of him. No comments. Namjoon, is the group in crisis? No comments. Jimin, are you worried about Jungkook? Jimin stopped. The security team looked nervous. Jimin turned toward the reporters. Yes. Everyone froze. RM looked at him. Jimin continued. I'm worried because he's human. A dozen cameras erupted. But we're together, Jimin said, and that's all you need to know. Then he turned and walked away. In the car, everyone remained silent for several minutes. Finally, Jin said, that was either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless. Jimin stared out the window. Probably both. Suga laughed softly. Sounds like us. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Thank you, don't thank me. Why? Because you would have done the same. Jungkook smiled sadly. I don't know. You would. The car moved through the city while the rain returned. Jungkook watched buildings slide past the window. His phone buzzed again. This time he turned it off. I'm scared, he admitted. No one laughed. No one tried to fix it. RM simply said, we know. I'm scared they'll hate me. Jin turned around from the front seat. Some people might. Jungkook looked at him. Jin continued, and some people will love you more after hearing the truth. Jungkook looked down. What if both happen? Then both happen. Jin smiled. You can't control everyone. Suga added, that's the lesson you've been avoiding. Jungkook frowned. Which is? You can't make the world safe. Jungkook was silent. Suga looked at him through the rearview mirror. You can only decide who gets access to you. When they arrived at the dorm, nobody went to their rooms. They gathered in the living room. The atmosphere was different from the previous night, heavier, more defensive, more dangerous. RM placed his phone on the table. We're going to find the leak ourselves. J-Hope nodded. Agreed. But we need to be careful. Why? Taehyung asked. RM looked at him. Because if we accuse the wrong person, we destroy someone innocent. Suga nodded. Then we start with facts. They spent the next 2 hours reconstructing the previous night. Who entered the rehearsal room, who left, which cameras were still connected, which microphones had been active, which devices had access to the production system. Jungkook sat quietly listening. Then suddenly he remembered something. Wait, everyone looked at him. What? There was someone else. RM leaned forward. Who? Jungkook frowned. I don't know his name. Describe him. He wasn't part of the regular production team. J-Hope's expression changed. What did he look like? Jungkook closed his eyes, trying to remember. Dark jacket, gray badge, he was carrying a tablet. Suga asked, when did you see him? Before rehearsal. Did he speak to you? No. Did anyone? Jungkook shook his head. But he opened his eyes. He was near the camera after everyone left. RM stood. Are you sure? I think so. Think carefully. Jungkook's breathing quickened. I remember because I asked him whether the camera was still recording. Everyone went still. What did he say? Jungkook's face changed. He said, he swallowed. He said it's already off. Suga's expression hardened. But it wasn't. Jungkook stared at him. What? RM reached for his phone. The technical log shows one camera remained active for 17 minutes after the official shutdown. Jungkook's face went white. 17 minutes. Yes, Jimin stood. Then someone knew. Or someone deliberately left it running, Suga said. J-Hope looked toward the dark window. That's not a random leak. Nobody spoke. Suddenly Jungkook's phone lit up. An unknown number, a message appeared. I didn't leak your words, but I know who did. Jungkook stared at it. Hyung. RM crossed the room. What? Jungkook showed him. The others crowded around. Another message appeared. Trust the person who tells you the recording was an accident. Suga took a screenshot. Don't reply. Jungkook's hand shook. Who is this? A third message arrived. Ask who BTS from making you look like the problem, then nothing. This is getting worse, J-Hope whispered. No, Suga said, it's getting clearer. RM looked at him. How? Because whoever sent this doesn't want Jungkook to leave. Then what do they want? Suga stared at the screen. They want us to look somewhere else. The room fell silent. Jungkook suddenly remembered the executive's question. Are you thinking about leaving BTS? He had asked it before they had discussed the leak, before anyone should have known the details. Jungkook looked at RM. He knew. Who? The executive. What about him? He asked if I was leaving before he told us about the recording. RM's expression changed. You're right. Jimin looked between them. How would he know? Unless someone told him, Taehyung said. Suga shook his head. Or unless he already had the recording. The possibility settled over them like smoke. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Jungkook stood. I want to confront him. RM grabbed his arm. No. Why? Because that's exactly what someone wants. I don't care. I do. Jungkook pulled his arm away. I'm tired of being protected. RM stared at him. We're not protecting you from the truth. Then let me face it. You're angry, yes. You're scared, yes. And you're hurt. Jungkook's eyes flashed. Yes, the word exploded through the room. Everyone froze. Jungkook's chest rose sharply. Yes, I'm hurt, I'm angry, I'm terrified, I'm all of those things, and I'm tired of pretending I'm not. He looked at every member. Every time something happens, someone tells me to calm down, think carefully, don't react, don't say too much, don't make it worse. Tears appeared in his eyes. But what about me? Nobody answered. When does someone ask what I want? Jimin stepped forward. I'm asking now. Jungkook looked at him. What do you want? Jungkook couldn't answer. His lips trembled. I don't know. Jimin nodded. Then let's find out. Jungkook sat down. His anger dissolved into exhaustion. RM crouched in front of him. You're right. Jungkook looked up. About what? We protect you so quickly that sometimes we forget to listen. Jungkook wiped his eyes. I don't want to leave BTS. Everyone relaxed slightly. But I don't want BTS to become the reason I disappear. RM nodded. Then it won't. You can't promise that. No. RM smiled sadly. But I can promise you won't disappear alone. The words broke something inside Jungkook. He leaned forward and rested his forehead against RM's shoulder. This time he didn't cry loudly. He simply breathed, slowly, carefully, as if learning the rhythm again. Hours later, the group finally went asleep. Jungkook couldn't. He stood by the window watching the city. His phone remained off. For the first time in years, he didn't want to know what people were saying. He wanted silence. He wanted the sound of rain. He wanted the freedom to exist without being measured. Behind him, the door opened. Suga walked in, still awake. Yeah, Suga sat beside him. Me too. They watched the city together. After a while, Jungkook said, do you regret it? What? Everything. Suga thought for a long time. No, even the pressure. No one said the pressure was the price of loving music. Jungkook looked at him. Then what is the price? Suga smiled faintly. Sometimes the price is realizing you can't be everything to everyone. Jungkook nodded. I'm scared I'll lose people. You will? Jungkook looked startled. That's brutal. It's true. Suga looked at him. People leave, fans change, circumstances change, even we change. Jungkook looked down. Then what's left? Suga pointed toward the 7 empty chairs in the living room. Choice. Jungkook frowned. Choice. We keep choosing each other. Jungkook's eyes softened. Even when it's difficult, especially then. They sat quietly until sunrise began to lighten the windows. Jungkook watched the darkness turn gray. For the first time since the leak, his breathing became steady. Somewhere outside, the world was already creating new stories about him. Some would be cruel. Some would be loving. Some would be completely false. He couldn't control any of them. But inside the quiet room, surrounded by people who had heard the truth directly from him, Jungkook finally understood that being BTS did not mean surrendering every piece of himself to the world. It meant learning how to stand beside 6 people who would remind him that his identity existed beyond the name printed on posters, screens, albums, and headlines. When the others slowly woke, nobody talked about the leak immediately. Jin made coffee. J-Hope opened the curtains. Taehyung played music quietly from his phone. Jimin sat beside Jungkook without asking questions. RM watched the sunrise. Suga stood by the kitchen counter, staring at the message from the unknown number one final time before deleting it. There were still unanswered questions. There was still a leak. There were still people outside waiting for an explanation. But inside that room, the 7 members understood one thing clearly. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Jungkook looked around at them and smiled. "Can we have breakfast before saving the world?" Jin laughed. "Finally, someone has priorities." The others laughed too. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant for cameras. It was simply theirs, and for Jungkook that was enough. Before you accuse anyone else, ask yourself one question. How much of this are you willing to lose? The voice came from the dark hallway, and Jungkook froze with one hand still resting on the kitchen counter. It was barely 6 in the morning. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hiss of the coffee machine and the rain tapping against the windows, yet those words instantly pulled the exhaustion back into his body. He turned slowly. Suga stood at the end of the hallway, still wearing yesterday's black sweatshirt, his hair messy from sleep, his expression unreadable. "Lose what?" Jungkook asked. Suga didn't answer immediately. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself coffee, and stared into the cup as though the answer might be floating there. "Everything." Jungkook frowned. "That's not helpful. It wasn't supposed to be." Jungkook crossed his arms. "You knew something last night." Suga looked up. "I suspected something." "That's different." "Not by much." Hyung. "What?" "Stop talking like a riddle." Suga gave a faint smile. "You're getting better at being angry. Maybe because everyone keeps giving me reasons." "Good." Jungkook stared at him. "Good. Anger is better than disappearing." The words landed hard. Jungkook looked away. The coffee machine clicked off. Somewhere in the living room, someone turned in their sleep. Suga lowered his voice. "You said last night that you don't want BTS to become the reason you disappear." "I meant it." "I know. Then why are you asking how much I'm willing to lose?" Suga leaned against the counter. "Because the person who leaked the recording may not be trying to make you leave." Jungkook's eyes narrowed. "Then what are they trying to do? Divide us?" "Why? Because divided people are easier to control." Jungkook went silent. Suga watched him carefully. "And whoever is doing this understands that. You think it's someone inside the company. I think we should stop assuming the leak is the whole story." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "What else is there?" Before Suga could answer, RM appeared in the doorway. He had clearly heard the last part. "There's a meeting in 40 minutes. Suga nodded. "With who?" Jungkook asked. "Management." Again. Jungkook laughed bitterly. "Of course." RM looked at him. "You don't have to attend." "I'm attending." Jungkook, "No." His voice was firm. "If they're talking about me, I'm going to be there." RM studied his face and eventually nodded. "Okay." Suga picked up his cup. "Then don't let them speak for you." The apartment gradually came alive. Jin entered complaining about the coffee being too strong. J-Hope was already checking his phone, his expression darkening every few seconds. Taehyung emerged from his room with headphones around his neck. Jimin came last, carrying a stack of toast and looking like he hadn't slept at all. "Everyone's awake," Jin said. "Wonderful, I hate mornings." J-Hope didn't laugh. "The story is getting worse." The room went quiet. Jungkook looked at him. "What story?" J-Hope hesitated. "There's a new claim." "What claim?" "That you demanded a solo release and threatened to stop group promotions." Jungkook stared at him. "That's a lie." "I know." "Then why are people repeating it?" "Because someone provided screenshots." RM reached for the phone. "Screenshots of what?" J-Hope showed him. A series of messages appeared on the screen. The names had been blurred, but the conversation was supposedly between Jungkook and an executive. In the screenshots, Jungkook appeared to be demanding control over his career and threatening to withdraw from BTS if he wasn't given more freedom. Jungkook stared at them, his face changed. "Those aren't mine." Jimin stepped closer. "Are you sure?" Jungkook turned sharply. "Yes." Jimin immediately raised both hands. "I believe you." "Then why did you ask?" "Because I wanted to make sure." Jungkook looked at the screen again. "Someone made this." Suga took the phone. "Look at the timestamps." RM leaned over. "They're inconsistent." "Exactly," Suga pointed. "The conversation supposedly happened on a day Jungkook was overseas." Jin frowned. "So, the messages show Korean local time, but the device metadata attached to the leaked screenshots indicates another time zone." J-Hope stared at him. "Can you know that from a screenshot?" "Not from the image itself." "From the original file someone sent to me." Everyone looked at him. "Someone sent you the original?" Suga nodded. "An anonymous account." Jungkook's stomach tightened. "The same one?" "No, then there are two people." "Maybe." RM took a breath. "Show me." Suga handed over his phone. RM examined the files. "This metadata shouldn't have survived." "It shouldn't have." "Then whoever sent this wants us to know it exists." "That's what I think." Jin rubbed his forehead. "This is becoming a conspiracy." "Maybe," Taehyung said quietly, "but conspiracies don't usually leave this many fingerprints." Everyone turned toward him. Taehyung shrugged. "I've been reading." Jin groaned. "That's dangerous." Taehyung ignored him. "Someone is deliberately building a story around Jungkook." Jimin's expression hardened. "And they're using his own words against him." Jungkook sat down. "Why me?" Nobody answered immediately. "Why me?" he repeated. "Why not someone else?" RM finally said, "Because you're vulnerable right now." Jungkook looked at him. "That's exactly what I don't want people to hear." "Why?" "Because they'll say I'm unstable." J-Hope shook his head. "You're exhausted, not unstable. The internet doesn't care about the difference." Suga nodded. "That's why this is dangerous." The room fell silent again. The meeting was approaching. Jungkook could feel his pulse in his neck. He wanted to be brave. He wanted to walk into the room and demand answers. But another part of him wanted to disappear into his bedroom and lock the door. Jimin noticed. "You don't have to do this alone." Jungkook looked at him. "I know." "Do you?" Jungkook hesitated. "I'm trying to." Jimin smiled. "Then that's enough for now." They arrived at the company building just before 9. The lobby was crowded with staff. Conversations became quieter as the 7 members entered. Jungkook felt every glance. He kept his head up. Inside the elevator, Jin whispered, "If anyone stares too long, I'll stare back." Taehyung smiled. "That'll make it worse." "Exactly. You're impossible." "I've been told." The elevator opened. Their meeting room was already occupied. The executive from the previous day sat at the head of the table. Beside him were several legal advisors, a communications director, and 2 people Jungkook had never seen before. One of them was a woman in her 40s with a tablet resting on her lap. The other was a younger man wearing a dark suit and a gray badge. Jungkook stopped. Gray badge, dark jacket, tablet. His heart dropped. Suga noticed immediately. "You know him?" Jungkook didn't answer. And looked at Jungkook. Their eyes met. For 1 second neither moved. Then the man looked down. RM followed Jungkook's gaze. "Who is he?" The executive cleared his throat. "He's part of the digital security team." Suga's eyes narrowed. "Name? Han Seojin." Jungkook's stomach turned. "That's him." Everyone looked at him. "He was in the rehearsal room." The executive frowned. "That's impossible." "I saw him." Jungkook's voice became firmer. "He told me the camera was off." Han Seojin remained silent. The executive looked at him. "Were you there?" The man nodded. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell us?" "I was monitoring equipment." "And the camera, it was disconnected." Jungkook shook his head. "No." Seojin looked at him. "You asked me if it was recording. I told you it wasn't. You lied. I believed it was off. You were standing next to it. I wasn't operating the camera." "Then who was?" Silence. Suga leaned forward. "Answer him." Seojin looked at the executive. "I don't know." "That's convenient," Suga said. "It's not a joke," the executive snapped. Suga smiled coldly. "Neither is betrayal." RM raised a hand. "Enough." Then he looked at Seojin. "What happened after the cameras were shut down?" "I left." "When?" "Around midnight." Jungkook shook his head. "No." Seojin looked at him. "You were still there." "For how long?" "I don't remember." "You don't remember 17 minutes?" RM asked. Seojin's face changed slightly. It was small, almost invisible, but Suga caught it. "There," Suga said. "What?" the executive asked. "You reacted." Seojin looked at him. "I didn't." "You did. I don't know what you're talking about." Suga leaned forward. "You were told the camera remained active for 17 minutes and your expression changed." The executive slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous." "Is it?" Suga asked. "Then open the logs. They are under investigation." "Open them." "We cannot expose internal security data." RM's voice hardened. "Then we're done." The executive stared at him. "What?" "We're not discussing anything until we see the evidence." The communications director intervened. "This isn't helping." Jungkook turned toward her. "You want to help?" She looked at him. "Yes." "Then stop asking me to apologize." Her face went pale. "Nobody asked you to apologize." Jungkook laughed. "Yesterday you told me the safest statement would be, 'I regret any concern my words may have caused.' That was a proposed statement. It's still an apology. It's a clarification. No, it's a confession without the truth." The room became silent. The woman lowered her tablet. "Jungkook, your words are being interpreted in ways that could damage the group." "My words were private. That doesn't change the impact. So I'm responsible for someone stealing them." "That's not what I meant." "What did you mean?" She hesitated. Jungkook stood. "Everyone keeps telling me to protect BTS. I'm asking you, who is protecting me?" Nobody answered. His voice rose. "Who?" The executive stood. "Sit down." Jungkook stared at him. "Don't tell me to sit down. You're letting your emotions control this meeting. Maybe because you keep treating my life like a crisis report." RM stood beside him. "We're leaving." The executive pointed toward the door. "If you walk out, this becomes much harder." Jungkook turned. "Harder for who?" The executive's face tight. "For everyone." "No," Jungkook said. "Harder for you." The 7 members walked out. The door closed behind them. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Jin burst out laughing. "Well," J-Hope looked at him. "What's funny?" "Nothing." Jin wiped his eyes. "I'm just imagining the headline." "Don't," RM said. "Please don't." Jin's smile faded. "Sorry." Jungkook looked at him. "You don't have to apologize either." Jin smiled. "Look at you." "What?" "Learning." They reached the elevator. But before the doors opened, Jungkook's phone vibrated. Unknown number. He looked down. A message appeared. "You were right about Han Seogan." But he didn't leak the recording. Jungkook's blood ran cold. Another message appeared. "He was ordered to leave the camera on." Then another. "Ask who gave the order." Jungkook stared at the screen. "Hyung." Everyone gathered around. Suga took the phone. "Who is this?" No answer. Then the final message arrived. "The person who ordered it is closer to BTS than you think." The elevator doors opened. Nobody stepped inside. Jimin whispered, "What does that mean?" Suga's expression was grim. "It means we're looking for the wrong person." RM looked back toward the meeting room. "Then we start again." They returned to a private studio and locked the door. The room smelled faintly of wood and dust. J-Hope closed the blinds. Jin disconnected the room's smart speaker. Taehyung checked the television. Suga examined every visible device. "Paranoid?" Jin asked. "Yes." "Good." They sat around a small table. Jungkook placed the phone in the center. "What if it's someone we know?" Taehyung asked. "Someone close." The message said closer to BTS. Jimin shook his head. "Could mean management, could mean staff, could mean someone in the group," Taehyung said. The words stunned everyone. Jungkook looked at him. "Why would you say that?" "Because we can't eliminate anything." Jimin's expression hardened. "Don't." Taehyung looked at him. "I'm not accusing anyone. But you know what that sounds like. I'm saying we need to be honest." "Honest?" Jimin stood. "You're suggesting one of us could have done this." "I'm suggesting we shouldn't assume. That's not the same thing, isn't it?" Jimin's voice rose. "You think I'd leak Jungkook's breakdown?" "I didn't say that." "Then say what you mean." "Jimin," RM intervened. "Stop." Jimin turned toward him. "No, we keep saying we're family. Then we start treating each other like suspects." Taehyung's face fell. "That's not what I want." "Then don't say it." "I was scared." "So was Jungkook, I know." "Then think about how this feels to him." Everyone looked at Jungkook. He sat silently, hands clasped together. "He's right," Jungkook said. Jimin looked at him. "What?" "We can't start destroying ourselves because someone outside wants us to." Taehyung lowered his head. "I'm sorry." Jimin's anger softened. "I'm sorry too." Taehyung nodded. "I don't want to fight with you." "Me neither." They sat down again. RM exhaled. "This is exactly what they want." Suga nodded. "Conflict. Between us." "Yes." Then we don't give it to them. Hours passed as they investigated every detail available to them. They discovered that the leaked recording had been accessed from a secured internal server twice. The first access was legitimate. The second had been made using a temporary authorization code. That code had been issued to a senior administrative account. The account belonged to someone who had worked with BTS for years, someone trusted. Someone whose name made the room silent when RM read it aloud. Director Kang. Jin's face changed. No, J-Hope looked stunned. Are you sure? Suga nodded. The access log says so. Jungkook stared at the screen. Director Kang had been with them during some of their hardest years. He had seen their first rehearsals, their first overseas schedules, their biggest disappointments. He had helped negotiate difficult situations. He had brought food when they were too busy to eat. He had defended them in meetings. He had once told Jungkook that no matter how large BTS became, he should never forget to sleep. It can't be him, Jungkook whispered. RM looked at him. We don't know yet. But why? That's what we need to find out. They confronted Director Kang that evening. He met them in a small conference room. He looked tired, older than Jungkook remembered. When RM placed the access log on the table, Director Kang stared at it for a long time. You think I leaked it? Nobody answered. Say it, Suga did. Did you? Director Kang closed his eyes. No. Then why was your account used? I don't know. That's not enough. Director Kang looked at Jungkook. I would never do that to you. Jungkook wanted to believe him. He really did. Then tell us what happened. Director Kang swallowed. 3 weeks ago, I was asked to approve a new internal communications protocol. By whom? RM asked. The executive board. Why? Security concerns, Suga frowned. And did you approve it? No. Why? Director Kang looked at Jungkook. Because it gave certain departments access to private rehearsal data. Jungkook's face went cold. How private? Audio, video, internal notes, draft communications. Jimin stared at him. Why would anyone need that? They said it was for crisis prevention. Suga laughed bitterly. Crisis creation, more like. Director Kang shook his head. I refused. Then what? My account was suspended for 2 days. RM leaned forward. But the access happened after it was restored. Director Kang nodded. Exactly. Who restored it? I don't know. You don't know. The system restored it automatically. Suga stared at him. That's impossible. Apparently not. Director Kang looked exhausted. I came here tonight because I knew eventually you'd discover this. Jungkook stared at him. Why didn't you tell us? Director Kang's eyes filled with regret. I was afraid. Of what? Losing my job. The honesty hurt more than any lie could have. Jungkook looked down. So you stayed quiet? Yes. While someone used your account? Yes. And now you expect us to trust you? Director Kang shook his head. No, he stood. I expect you to understand that sometimes people are afraid to do the right thing. Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. I understand that too well. Director Kang looked at him. Then don't become like me. The room went silent. Director Kang reached into his jacket and placed a small drive on the table. This is everything I copied before they suspended my access. RM stared at it. What's on it? Internal communications. From whom? Director Kang looked at him. People discussing how to manage Jungkook's image. Jungkook's stomach dropped. My image? Yes. Why? Because someone decided your vulnerability could be monetized. Nobody moved. What does that mean? Jungkook asked. Director Kang's voice was barely above a whisper. They believe public concern about you can increase engagement. Jimin stood. You're saying someone intentionally leaked his private breakdown because it generates attention. That's what I believe. Suga's face became expressionless. Who? Director Kang hesitated. I don't have proof. Names. Several people. Names. Director Kang looked toward the door. Not here. RM understood. Where? A place without cameras. Suga laughed. We're already in one. Director Kang shook his head. No, you aren't. Everyone froze. He pointed toward the ceiling. That light has a microphone. Jin looked up. What? And the television. Taehyung immediately unplugged it. What about the table? I don't know. Suga stood. Everybody out. They left the room. Director Kang led them into an old storage area beneath the building. Dust covered the shelves. The air smelled of paper and concrete. There were no visible cameras. Director Kang finally stopped. Now. He pulled another folder from his bag. This is where it gets worse. RM opened it. Inside were internal documents. One contained a chart with several names. Jungkook's name appeared at the top. Beside it were categories: public sentiment, emotional vulnerability, controversy potential, solo conversion probability, retention risk. Jungkook stared at the page. His face went blank. Jimin took it from him. What the hell is this? Director Kang lowered his eyes. An internal behavioral assessment. J-Hope looked sick. They analyzed him like a product. Jin's hands trembled. No, Suga took the document. Read the bottom. RM did. His face hardened. Strategic exposure may increase fan engagement during periods of declining attention. Jungkook stepped backward. Strategic exposure, he laughed. They wanted to expose me, nobody answered. His laugh became louder. So when I was breaking down, someone saw an opportunity. Jimin grabbed his shoulder. Jungkook, don't. He pulled away. Don't touch me. Jimin froze. Jungkook's eyes were filled with tears. I told you guys I was scared. He pointed toward the document. And someone turned that fear into a strategy. Suga's jaw clenched. That's why they asked whether you were leaving. RM looked at him. They needed the rumor. Exactly. Jungkook's breathing became uneven. They needed people to think I was unstable. J-Hope nodded slowly. Because then any future decision you make can be framed as emotional or dangerous. Yes, Jungkook wiped his face. They wanted me to doubt myself. Suga looked at the document again, and they succeeded. The words cut deeper than expected. Jungkook sat on an old wooden crate. He stared at the floor. I almost believed them. Jimin crouched in front of him. Believed what? That maybe I really was the problem. You weren't, but I said those things. Because they were true. Maybe they weren't supposed to be. Jimin's voice hardened. Who decides that? Jungkook looked up. Exactly. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Nobody gets to tell you which emotions you're allowed to have. RM knelt beside them. This ends now. Jungkook looked at him. How? We expose it. Suga shook his head. Not yet. RM turned. Why? Because we don't know everything. We've seen enough. No, Suga pointed at the document. This is evidence of a strategy, not the person who ordered the leak. Then what do we need? The original authorization. Director Kang nodded slowly. I may know where it is. Everyone looked at him. Where? The executive board's archive. Suga smiled grimly. Then we go there. RM looked at him. We can't break into company archives. I didn't say break in. Suga looked at Jungkook. We make them open the door. Jungkook wiped his face. How? Suga's eyes hardened. We stopped playing defense. The next morning, Jungkook walked into the company building alone. Cameras flashed immediately. Reporters shouted questions. He didn't stop. He entered the lobby and walked straight to the executive offices. His security team tried to follow, but he raised a hand. I'll be fine. At the reception desk, he said, I need to see the board. The receptionist looked startled. Do you have an appointment? No, I'm sorry, but then tell them Jungkook is here. 10 minutes later, the executive entered the lobby. What are you doing? Jungkook looked at him calmly. I'm here to ask a question. This isn't the place. Then answer me somewhere else. The executive's face hardened. You're making a mistake. Jungkook nodded. Maybe. Your emotions are running high. I know. You should let your representatives handle this. Jungkook looked directly into his eyes. No, Jungkook. I'm done letting other people explain me. The lobby had gone silent. Staff members were watching. Security stood nearby. The executive lowered his voice. Come upstairs. No. Why? Because if I go upstairs, this disappears again. The executive stared at him. What do you want? Jungkook took a breath. I want the authorization records for the internal behavioral assessment. The executive's face changed, only slightly, but enough. Jungkook saw it. You know what I'm talking about. I have no idea. Then prove it. This is inappropriate. So was recording me. You have no evidence I recorded you. I didn't accuse you. The executive fell silent. Jungkook turned toward the elevator. Give me the records. And if I refuse, Jungkook looked back. Then I'll ask publicly. The executive stared at him. Are you threatening the company? No, Jungkook's voice was calm. I'm reminding you that I'm part of the company too. Then he walked away. Behind him, whispers erupted. Within hours, rumors exploded again. But this time, Jungkook did not hide. He posted nothing. He gave no statement. He simply refused to let fear make every decision for him. That evening, the executive finally agreed to provide limited access. The 7 members gathered in a secure room with lawyers present. The archive opened. Files appeared. Most were routine. Then they found it. A document titled Engagement Recovery Strategy. Jungkook's name appeared repeatedly. The plan described increasing emotional vulnerability narratives around him to stimulate fan discussion. It recommended controlled leaks. It recommended ambiguity. It recommended allowing rumors to spread before issuing carefully worded denials. It even suggested that Jungkook's public image would become more valuable if fans believed he was under unbearable pressure. Jin slammed his hand against the table. "This is disgusting." J-Hope's eyes were red. "They manufactured pain." Suga stared at the document. "And someone approved it." RM scrolled down. There was a digital signature. Everyone leaned closer. Jungkook stopped breathing. The signature belonged to the executive who had questioned him that morning. Jimin whispered, "No." The executive's face went pale. "This isn't what it looks like." Suga stood. "Then tell us what it looks like." "I didn't authorize the leak, but you authorized the strategy. The strategy was never supposed to include private recordings. You created the environment that made the leak profitable. That's not fair." Jungkook stood. "Neither was what you did to me." The executive looked at him. "I was trying to protect the group." Jungkook laughed bitterly. "By breaking me." "Protecting BTS." "No," Jungkook's voice shook. "You were protecting the business. They're the same thing. They aren't." The room went silent. Jungkook stepped closer. "That's what you don't understand." Tears rolled down his cheeks. "BTS is not a product that needs to stay interesting. We're people." The executive opened his mouth. Jungkook continued. "You saw my fear and called it engagement. You saw my pain and called it strategy. You saw me struggling and thought about numbers." His voice broke. "And then you wondered why I couldn't breathe." Jimin stood beside him. "You're done." The executive looked at him. "You don't have that authority." RM stepped forward. "Maybe not," Suga added, "but we have a choice." Jin nodded. "And so do millions of people who support us." J-Hope looked at Jungkook. "What do you want to do?" Jungkook stared at the documents. He wanted revenge. He wanted to scream. He wanted to destroy everything. But beneath all of that was something quieter. Something more important. "I want the truth," RM nodded. "Then we'll tell it." Jungkook looked at the others. "All of it," Suga said, "all of it. Even if it hurts, especially then." They sat together in silence as the rain began again outside. The documents remained open on the table, exposing a world none of them had wanted to believe existed. Jungkook leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The pressure hadn't disappeared. The cameras hadn't disappeared. Expectations hadn't disappeared. But something inside him had changed. For years he had believed that being strong meant enduring everything quietly. Now he understood that sometimes strength meant refusing to stay quiet. Jimin reached for his hand beneath the table. Jungkook squeezed it. Taehyung placed his hand over theirs. J-Hope joined. Jin followed. RM looked at them and smiled faintly. Suga shook his head but placed his hand on the pile anyway. 7 hands, 7 people, 1 decision. Jungkook opened his eyes. "I'm still scared." RM nodded. "So are we." "What if this destroys everything?" Suga answered quietly. "Then we'll rebuild what matters." Jungkook looked at the rain. For once he didn't need certainty. He didn't need to know what the headlines would say tomorrow. He didn't need to know whether the world would understand. He only needed to know that the 6 people beside him had heard his truth and had chosen to stay. Outside, the city continued glowing beneath the storm. Inside, Jungkook sat with the people who knew the difference between the name BTS and the 7 human beings carrying it. And for the first time, the pressure did not feel like a command. It felt like something they could finally face together. "Delete everything." Jungkook's voice was barely above a whisper, but the command froze everyone in the room. RM looked up from the documents spread across the table. "What?" Jungkook stared at the screen displaying the internal strategy file, his face drained of color. "Delete it." Suga's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because if we keep going, this becomes war." Jimin stepped closer. "It already is." "No," Jungkook shook his head. "This is different." His fingers trembled against the edge of the table. "We're talking about people losing their jobs, families, careers, everything." Jin frowned. "And what about what they tried to do to you?" Jungkook didn't answer. J-Hope stood beside him. "Jungkook, I don't want revenge." Nobody said revenge. "Then what are we doing?" Jungkook looked around the room. "We're preparing to destroy them." RM slowly closed the folder. "We're preparing to expose the truth." What's the difference? Suga answered before RM could. Intent. Jungkook looked at him. You think that makes it better? No, Suga's voice was calm. I think it makes it necessary. Jungkook looked back at the screen. The document was still there, his name, his vulnerabilities, his fears, his exhaustion, all reduced to numbers, predictions, and strategies. He felt sick. They wrote down everything. Jimin moved closer. I know. They knew I was struggling. Yes. And they watched. Yes. Why didn't anyone tell me? No one answered. Jungkook's eyes filled. Why didn't anyone tell me someone was studying me like this? RM looked down. Because we didn't know. That's what scares me, he swallowed. If they could do this without us knowing, what else don't we know? The question lingered. Suga reached for the laptop. That's why we're not deleting anything. Jungkook caught his wrist. Hyung, no. Suga looked directly into his eyes. You don't destroy evidence because you're afraid of what it proves. Jungkook released him. Suga turned back to the screen. We preserve it. A lawyer sitting nearby cleared his throat. There is something else. Everyone turned. What? The lawyer asked carefully. You should know that the file you found may not be the original. RM frowned. What do you mean? The metadata suggests it was modified twice. J-Hope leaned forward. Modified by whom? We don't know yet. Suga stared at the lawyer. Then find out. We're trying. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's complicated. No, Suga pointed at the screen. It's complicated because someone wants it to be. The lawyer looked uncomfortable. Jungkook slowly sat down. What if the strategy wasn't created for me? Everyone stared at him. What? RM asked. What if I wasn't the first? Suga's eyes sharpened. Explain. Jungkook looked at the document. The way they wrote it, it doesn't sound like something created because of me. It sounds like a system. RM's face changed. A system. A system for all of us. Silence. Jimin's eyes widened. You think they did this to the other members too? I don't know. Jungkook looked toward the others. But if they were analyzing me, why wouldn't they analyze everyone? Nobody spoke. Jin slowly leaned back. That's a horrifying question. Maybe it's the right one, Taehyung said. RM closed his eyes for a moment. We need to know. J-Hope nodded. All of us. Suga stood. Then we searched the archive. The lawyer immediately shook his head. You can't access restricted personnel files without authorization. Suga looked at him. Then get authorization. That could take days. Then start today. The executive's legal representative looked uneasy. You don't understand the consequences. Jin's voice turned cold. We understand them better than you think. The room fell silent. Then the door opened. The executive himself walked in. He looked exhausted. His tie was loose. His face had lost the confidence it had carried the previous day. You shouldn't be accessing those files. RM stood. Then you shouldn't have created them. You don't understand what happened. Jungkook looked at him. Then explain. The executive looked around the room. Not here. Why? Because this room is monitored. Everyone froze. Suga slowly looked toward the ceiling. By whom? I don't know. That's not reassuring. I'm trying to help you. Jungkook laughed bitterly. You've had a strange way of showing it. The executive's eyes tightened. Do you think I wanted this? I don't know what you wanted. I wanted BTS to survive. RM stepped forward. Survive what? The executive hesitated. The next stage, Suga frowned. What does that mean? You think the pressure is just from fans? He laughed bitterly. You have no idea. Jungkook stared at him. Then tell us. Not here. Where? Somewhere private. How do we know it's private? The executive looked at him. You don't. That answer sent a chill through the room. He lowered his voice. That's the problem. The executive left. Nobody moved for several seconds. Finally, Jimin whispered, I don't like this. Neither do I, RM said. Suga was already walking toward the door. Where are you going? To find out who is listening. The next hour became a frantic sweep of rooms, phones, cameras, microphones, computers, and access logs. Security personnel were brought in. Several devices were disconnected. One hidden recording device was found inside an air vent. Another was discovered behind a television. A third was found beneath a conference table. Nobody could explain how they had been installed. Jungkook stood in the hallway staring at the devices lined up inside transparent evidence bags. How long? He whispered. What? Jimin asked. How long have they been listening? Jimin didn't know. Maybe not long. Jungkook looked at him. You don't believe that? Jimin swallowed. No. Jungkook turned away. I hate this. Jimin stepped beside him. I know. Every room feels unsafe. Then we'll find somewhere safe. Where? Jimin thought for a moment. Home. Jungkook laughed without humor. What if home isn't safe either? Jimin didn't answer. That silence was enough. Later that evening, the members moved to a temporary private residence arranged by their security team. The building was quiet, thick walls, no obvious surveillance. Security posted outside. For the first time in days, everyone sat around a dining table without laptops. Jin ordered food. J-Hope brought blankets. Taehyung dimmed the lights. RM made tea. Suga sat near the window. Jimin and Jungkook sat across from each other. Eat, Jin told Jungkook. I'm not hungry. I didn't ask. Jungkook smiled faintly. You're bossy. I've earned it. Jungkook picked up a piece of food. He took one bite. Jin nodded approvingly. Good. For several minutes, the room felt almost normal. Then Taehyung said quietly, do you remember when we were trainees? Everyone smiled. You mean when Jungkook was terrified of everything? Jin teased. Jungkook laughed. I was not. You were. I wasn't. You barely talked. I was shy. You hid behind Namjoon, RM laughed. That's true. Jungkook looked embarrassed. I was young. Jimin smiled. You still are. Jungkook looked at him. Don't start. I'm serious. Jimin's expression softened. Sometimes I forget how long we've been doing this. J-Hope nodded. So do I. RM stared at his tea. Maybe that's why this hurts so much. What? Jin asked. We built this together. RM looked around the table. And somewhere along the way, people started talking about us like we were assets instead of people. Suga nodded. That's what fame does. No, Jungkook said. Everyone looked at him. Fame doesn't do that. He paused. People do. Suga smiled faintly. Fair. Jungkook continued. I don't want to become cynical. You don't have to, Jimin said, but I don't want to be naive either. RM nodded. Neither do I. A knock came at the door. Everyone froze. Security checked the cameras. A man stood outside. Who is it? RM asked. The voice answered, Director Kang. Suga immediately stood. Don't open it. Director Kang's voice came through the door. Please, I have something you need to see. Jungkook looked at RM. Let him in. Suga shook his head. No. Jungkook stared at him. Why? Because we don't know if it's really him. The voice outside said, Yoongi, you were right not to trust me. Everyone went silent. Suga walked toward the door. What did you say? I said you were right. About what? I wasn't the only one using the archive. Suga's face hardened. Open the door. Security checked Director Kang's identity. After several minutes, the door opened. Director Kang entered carrying a black briefcase. He looked exhausted. We don't have much time, RM frowned. Why? Because they know you found the documents. Who? Everyone who needs to know. Jin stared at him. That's not an answer. Director Kang placed the briefcase on the table. This is. He opened it. Inside were printed reports, storage drives, and photographs. Jungkook stared at the photographs. They showed BTS at airports, rehearsals, hotels, interviews, private dinners. Some were clearly taken from long distances. Some appeared to have been captured through windows. Jimin's face went pale. Who took these? Director Kang looked down. Private contractors. Why? Monitoring. Monitoring what? Behavior. Taehyung picked up one photograph. This was taken outside my apartment. Director Kang nodded. Yes. Taehyung's expression changed. How long? Months. J-Hope slammed the photograph onto the table. This is illegal. Yes. Then why is it happening? Director Kang looked at Jungkook. Because someone believes the group's private behavior can be predicted. Jungkook's voice was quiet. Predicted for what? Control. The word made everyone silent. Suga opened one of the reports. This is bigger than engagement. Director Kang nodded. Much bigger. RM read the first page. His face became increasingly grim. They created psychological profiles. Yes, for all 7 of us. Yes. Jungkook's hands began shaking. And what did they say about me? Director Kang hesitated. You don't want to know, I asked. They described you as highly responsive to group pressure. Jungkook stared at him, meaning you're likely to sacrifice your own needs to protect the group. Jungkook laughed bitterly. They figured that out. Yes. So they used it. Yes, Jimin's voice cracked. That's why they kept telling him to protect BTS. Director Kang nodded. They knew he'd listen. Jungkook looked at the table. I hate them. Nobody corrected him. I hate that they knew me. Director Kang looked at him. They studied you. That's worse. Yes. Jungkook wiped his eyes. What about the others? Director Kang looked toward RM. You were classified as the emotional stabilizer. RM stared. What? They believed you would absorb conflict to prevent the group from fracturing. RM's face went still. Jin asked, and me? The emotional pressure valve. Jin laughed once. That's one way to describe me. Director Kang continued. J-Hope was classified as morale preservation. J-Hope stopped smiling. Jimin as interpersonal attachment. Jimin looked confused. Taehyung as unpredictability. Taehyung frowned. That's insulting. Suga took the report. And me? Director Kang looked at him. High resistance to external control. Suga smiled. At least they got one thing right. They considered you the most difficult to manipulate. Suga's smile disappeared. And what did they do about that? Director Kang hesitated. They monitored you more closely. The room fell silent. Jungkook looked at all 6 members. They turned us into categories. RM closed the report. Yes. They reduced everything we are to psychological labels. Yes. Jungkook's voice shook. Then why does this feel so personal? Jimin answered softly. Because it is. Director Kang looked at Jungkook. There is one more thing. What? The person who designed the system isn't the executive you confronted. Everyone froze. Suga's eyes narrowed. Who? Director Kang pulled out a photograph. It showed a man standing beside several executives at an industry event. Jungkook recognized him immediately. I've seen him. RM stared. Who is that? Director Kang whispered the name. Room went silent. It was someone none of them expected, someone who had publicly praised BTS for years, someone who had appeared at events, interviews, and industry meetings as a supporter, someone who had repeatedly spoken about protecting artists. Jungkook stared at the photograph. No, Director Kang nodded. Yes, he wouldn't. He did. Suga took the photograph. We need proof. There is proof. Director Kang pointed toward the briefcase. But there's another problem. What? The person who ordered the recording leak isn't him. RM's eyes widened. Then who? Director Kang looked toward the door. I don't know. Everyone froze again, but I know why they did it. Jungkook whispered. Why? Because the leak was supposed to trigger something. What? Director Kang's eyes met his. A public demand for change. Jungkook frowned. Change in what? Your contract. The room fell silent. J-Hope looked confused. Why would someone want Jungkook's contract changed? Director Kang shook his head. Not Jungkook's. He looked at all 7 members. All of yours. RM's face tightened. What kind of change? A restructuring. Meaning, more control over individual activities, more separation between members, more independent management. Suga stared at him. They wanted to split the group operationally. Yes. Jungkook's heart sank. Why? Director Kang's answer was quiet. Because BTS is stronger together than anyone expected. Nobody spoke. And some people believe that strength is a problem. The sentence stayed in the room. Jimin slowly shook his head. They wanted us divided. Yes, Taehyung's eyes filled with tears. After everything, Jin clenched his jaw. They really don't understand us. Maybe they understand you too well, Director Kang said. That's why they're afraid. Suga leaned back. Then they made one mistake. Everyone looked at him. They thought pressure would break us. Jungkook looked around the table. Instead it brought us here. RM nodded. Together. The night became longer. They read every document, every report, every observation, every prediction. Were disturbing. Some were absurd. Some were so intimate that Jungkook had to look away. They knew which member stayed awake when anxious, which member avoided conflict, which member used humor to hide exhaustion, which member became silent when hurt. They had recorded patterns that even the members hadn't consciously noticed. By 3 in the morning, nobody spoke. Jungkook stood by the window. Jimin joined him. You okay? No, Jimin nodded. Me neither. They know everything. Not everything. Jungkook looked at him. What don't they know? Jimin smiled softly. Why we stay? Jungkook's eyes filled. That's true. They can measure schedules, they can measure engagement, they can measure reactions. Jimin leaned against the window, but they can't measure what happens when one of us falls and the others reach out. Jungkook smiled through tears. That's probably what scares them. Jimin nodded. Maybe. Jungkook looked at the sleeping city. I don't want to be a symbol anymore. You don't have to. But I'm already one. Then be a symbol of something real. Jungkook looked at him. What's that? That it's okay to be tired. Jimin's voice trembled. That it's okay to say no. Jungkook nodded. That loving something doesn't mean letting it destroy you. Jimin looked at him. Exactly. Jungkook turned back toward the window. Then maybe this had to happen. Don't romanticize it. Jimin smiled sadly. What happened to you was wrong. I know. You don't need pain to become stronger. Jungkook nodded. I know. They stood silently. Then Jungkook whispered, thank you for staying. Jimin looked at him. Where else would I go? The next morning, the group faced the decision they had been avoiding. They could release everything. They could expose the internal strategy, the surveillance, the manipulation. But doing so would trigger an enormous public fight. Contracts could be affected. Employees could lose jobs. The company could collapse into scandal. Their reputation could suffer. Fans could become divided. Other artists could be dragged into the controversy. Jungkook sat at the table with his head bowed. Maybe we shouldn't release everything, RM nodded. I've been thinking the same. Suga looked surprised. Really? Yes. Why? Because truth isn't the same as destruction. Suga considered that. Then what do we release? RM looked at Jungkook. Enough to prove what happened to him. Jungkook shook his head. No. Everyone looked at him. Not just me. Jungkook, if we expose this, we expose the system. RM nodded slowly. Are you sure? Yes. It could become ugly. It already is. You could be attacked. I've already been attacked. The others could too. Jungkook looked at each member. Then we face it together. Jin smiled faintly. There he is. Jungkook laughed. What? The kid who used to hide behind Namjoon. RM smiled. He grew up. Unfortunately, Jin said. Now he argues with everyone. Jimin laughed. The tension broke for a moment. Then Suga leaned forward. Before we release anything, I want one thing. What? A direct confrontation. RM frowned. With whom? Suga looked at the photograph. The person who designed the system. Jungkook's expression hardened. Let's do it. 2 days later, they entered a private meeting room where the man from the photograph was waiting. He smiled when they entered. It's good to see you. Nobody returned the smile. You know why we're here, RM said. I have an idea. Suga placed the photograph on the table. Explain this. The man's expression remained calm. That's a photograph of me. And this? Suga placed the behavioral report beside it. Your system. The man looked at the document. I wouldn't call it my system. What would you call it? A research framework. Jungkook stepped forward. You studied me. We studied the group's public behavior. You studied my fear. We studied patterns. You knew I was struggling. We knew you were under pressure. And you used it, the man sighed. Jungkook, you misunderstand the purpose. Then explain it. The industry is changing. That's not an answer. The group has unprecedented influence. Still not an answer. There are risks. Jungkook laughed bitterly. So you treated us like risks. The man leaned back. We treated you like an institution. Jungkook's face hardened. I'm not an institution. You represent one. No, Jungkook stepped closer. I represent BTS. Exactly. And BTS is 6 people standing beside me. He corrected himself. 7. The man smiled faintly. That's emotional thinking. Yes, Jungkook's voice became stronger because we're human. The man looked at RM. You should control him. RM's face changed. Excuse me, he's emotional. He's honest. Honesty can be dangerous. Suga laughed. Now we know what you fear. The man looked at him. What? People who can't be controlled. I'll disappeared. Suga continued. That's why you categorized us. That's why you monitored us. That's why you tried to create distance between us. You're making assumptions. RM placed the documents on the table, then explained the signature. The man looked down. For the first time, his composure cracked. You don't understand what happens when a group becomes too powerful. Jungkook answered quietly, we don't need to. Why? Because that's your fear, not ours. Silence. The man stared at him. Jungkook continued. You thought pressure would make us separate. He looked at the 6 members. It made us closer. The man said nothing. You thought if you made me question myself, I'd become easier to control. Jungkook's voice trembled but did not break. Instead, I learned to ask for help. Jimin stepped beside him. You thought our differences were weaknesses. Taehyung joined them. They're not. J-Hope stood. They're what keep us balanced. Jin nodded. You thought we'd protect the brand before ourselves. RM looked directly at the man. You forgot the brand exists because of the people. Suga placed the final document on the table. And you forgot we can walk away from anything that destroys us. The man's eyes narrowed. You wouldn't. Jungkook looked at him. Try us. Nobody spoke. The man stared at the 7 members. 7 people who had arrived together. 7 people who had spent years being told what they represented. 7 people who had finally decided they would define that representation themselves. The meeting ended without agreement. But when they walked out, Jungkook felt something he hadn't felt in days, relief. Not because the problem was solved. It wasn't. There would be headlines, arguments, investigations, public statements, maybe lawsuits. Maybe consequences none of them could predict, but the fear had changed. It was no longer controlling him. That evening, the 7 members sat together in the same temporary residence. Nobody talked about strategy. Nobody talked about numbers. Jin cooked instant noodles. Taehyung played an old song. J-Hope danced badly in the kitchen until everyone laughed. RM sat on the floor reading nothing. Suga stared out the window. Jimin leaned against Jungkook's shoulder. Jungkook closed his eyes. "I think I'm finally tired." Jimin smiled. "Good. Why good? Because before you were too scared to admit it." Jungkook laughed softly. "I'm tired." "Then sleep. Tomorrow we'll deal with tomorrow." Jungkook looked around the room. "What if people hate us?" Jin answered from the kitchen. "Then we'll eat noodles while they do." Everyone laughed. Jungkook's eyes became wet. "What if everything changes?" RM smiled. "Everything always changes." "What if BTS changes?" Suga answered quietly. "Then BTS changes." Jungkook looked at him. "And that's okay. If we're choosing the change, yes." The room fell quiet. Jungkook leaned back and let himself breathe. He finally understood that the greatest pressure had never been the cameras, the stages, or the millions of eyes. It had been the belief that he had to preserve something exactly as it was forever, but nothing living could remain frozen. Not people, not friendships, not dreams, not even BTS. What mattered was not whether they stayed exactly the same. What mattered was whether they remained honest enough to recognize one another when everything changed. Later that night, Jungkook stepped onto the balcony alone. The city was quiet beneath him. He heard the door slide open behind him. RM joined him. "Can't sleep." "Not yet." RM stood beside him. "Neither can I." Jungkook smiled. "Hyung." "Yeah, do you think I did the right thing?" RM looked at him. "What thing?" "Speaking up." RM smiled. "I think you did the necessary thing. Even if it hurts. Especially because it hurts." Jungkook looked at the lights. "I used to think representing BTS meant being strong enough that nobody could see me struggle." RM shook his head. "Maybe it means being brave enough to let people see you're human." Jungkook nodded slowly. "Then maybe I finally understand." RM placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to understand everything tonight." Jungkook smiled. "I know." They stood there until the city began to quiet. Inside, the others were already asleep. The documents remained locked away. The investigation had only begun. The future was uncertain. But the fear that had once filled Jungkook's chest had finally made room for something else. Not certainty, not confidence. Something smaller and stronger, choice. He could choose when to speak. He could choose when to rest. He could choose whom to trust. And most importantly, he could choose to remain Jungkook even while carrying the name BTS. When he finally returned inside, Jimin was half asleep on the couch. He opened one eye. "You okay?" Jungkook smiled. "Yeah." "Really?" Jungkook thought about it. "Not completely." Jimin smiled. "Good enough." Jungkook sat beside him. The room was warm. The lights were low. The city outside had stopped demanding anything from them for a few hours. Jungkook leaned back, closed his eyes, and listened to the quiet breathing of the people he loved. For once, he didn't feel like he had to save anyone. He didn't feel like he had to represent anything. He didn't feel like he had to prove that he deserved to stand beneath the name BTS. He was simply Jungkook, surrounded by 6 people who knew him before the world turned him into an image, and who still knew him now. And in that quiet room, with no cameras watching and no audience waiting, he finally allowed himself to believe that maybe the future did not have to be something he carried alone.